Are you thinking about making the move to Spring, Texas? Well, in this video, I'm gonna give you my breakdown of everything that you need to know, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything that you need to know about the Spring, Klein area. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, stay tuned. Hi, my name is Aaron, and every week I'm helping buyers relocate to and throughout the greater city of Houston and the surrounding suburbs. If you need to know anything about where to eat, sleep, live, play, hit me up morning, noon, or night. I'm your guy. I'll drop my number on the screen and it'll be in the description below. It doesn't matter if you're a day, a week, a month, a year, 2 years, 3 years out. I would love to be a resource to you. And so in this video, we're gonna do a deep dive on everything that you need to know about the Spring, Klein, Champion Forest area. When it comes to Google Maps, Google is gonna very specifically call a certain thing spring, but when it comes to real estate, which is what this channel is all about, and giving you all the juicy details of everything that you need to know. Spring is a huge area, and it's basically everything north of the loop to a certain point is spring, and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean as we do a deep dive right now. So according to Google, this is all that you have to consider spring to be. It's about 25 to 30 miles away from the center of downtown Houston, so it's definitely one of the closer suburbs that you can get. The only one that probably has it beat out is Humble. And maybe some parts of Pearland have it a little bit closer than Spring is, but it's definitely one of the closest suburb communities that you can get to the overall city of downtown Houston. And so from a proximity standpoint, you get some of the best of both worlds, and who I think this is perfect for is for people that kind of want to be outside of the mix of being in Houston, of Houston proper, right, but want to have that suburb feel and that suburb vibe. You can get some really pretty established neighborhoods and some new construction neighborhoods out in the greater Spring, Klein area. So when I first moved out here, Spring was the place that had so many new construction projects. Like all of this was basically just redeveloped and became these different communities by these different builders. And so Spring is kind of winding down as far as what it can do, because it butts up against so many communities that are already starting to expand themselves, mainly like a Porter. You know, you have the Highland communities out here. You have some of these kind of woodland, Conroy kind of areas, these New Caney kind of areas that are butting up against what used to be considered Spring, or what could have been considered Spring, out in some of these outskirt kind of areas. And so now you're really starting to see the new construction projects really come to an end. But there are some gorgeous established communities, and a lot of these out here are going to be communities that were in that 70s, 80s, 90s kind of era of construction. So you're going to have the mature trees. You're going to be a little bit greener in some of these places than you would in, let's say, Spring on this side. Once you get over into the Klein side, it's definitely going to be a little bit greener, a little bit more lush than it would be on the other side of 45. As far as amenities go, you're going to have everything you need in the Spring, Klein area. You're going to have all of your restaurants. You're going to have your water parks. You're going to have your Lowe's, your Home Depots, your movie theaters. You're going to have all the stuff that you need, restaurants, everything that you're going to want to have to make sure that you don't feel like you need to come in and out of the greater Houston area. You're going to have all of that stuff at your fingertips out here. And so scanning around, you're gonna have your Genials. My wife really loves the noodles out at Genial. You're gonna have your Cheddars. I'm basic. I love a Cheddars. HEB, all of the stuff that you're gonna really want and need. Seafood restaurants is really right there, right? So as far as what it feels like to be in a suburb community and kind of have everything that you need, Spring does it as good as any of our suburbs out here. So like Acadia, Humble, any of those places that really feel like a suburb community, Spring does a really good job. And when I first moved here, I was brand new. I didn't really know where anything was. And I noticed that all of the area project managers that I worked under when I was at my old construction company basically lived in Spring. And I realized very quickly that it was a suburb that had good vibes. It was pretty. Everything kind of looked kind of clean, especially in the places that they lived. I can't speak for the whole thing, but in the places that they lived, they were super nice. They had some gated parts. And it was really kind of not that far from downtown Houston, which was basically where all of my job sites were when I first moved here. So it always gave me that happy medium kind of feel of being far enough away to not feel like you're in the hustle and bustle of Houston, while also, if you pick right, you can be around some great infrastructure for you and maybe a growing family. So out in Spring, a lot of the amenities that you're going to come more and more accustomed to are going to be more so off of 45. And so As you can see, just kind of hovering around 45 right now. You're going to have your Target. You're going to have your HEB not too far off of 45. You're going to have your Walmart over here. You're going to have your Hurricane Harbor. A lot of restaurants are going to be off of 45. So one of my favorite things to do with me and my family is to go down to Old Town Spring and just kind of check out the communities down there. If you're not familiar with it, it's like an old school bungalow kind of neighborhood. I think it was the original like downtown of what Spring used to be. But now those old bungalows are basically just turned into restaurants and just little things that you can do out in the area. And it's a fun time. They're always doing stuff that's like community oriented for like kids. And so we're gonna go out there for Halloween. Chandler's gonna be dressed up and we're gonna rack up as much candy as we possibly can. They do like little festivals out there. And also during Christmas time, they'll usually have like some Christmas lights, and there's places that sell ornaments, and that's some of the things that we like to personally do out there. But yeah, just kind of going down, once you're in Old Town Spring, it's just like a little town, right? And everything that you can want, there's gonna be food, there's gonna be game stores, there's gonna be clothing and apparel things that you can do in here. There's gonna be like little restaurants and little bars. So it's just a really cool vibe, just kind of going down here. Like I said, during the holidays is where it kind of really comes alive and it really shines. There's gonna be little popcorn stands and little funnel cakes and all that kind of stuff that really I shouldn't be having at this point. But it's just a really fun time for the family to be out there, and I really enjoy it. Food is really great, super affordable, and just a really good time. Can't remember what this restaurant is called, but it has some of the best funnel cakes. Oh my gosh, some of the best funnel cakes, and they always usually have like a live band or somebody out there just kind of strumming a guitar out there and singing the blues or something. It's just a really great time when you come out there. This is where we actually go and buy our ornaments from, and there's also like a little ice cream stand right here that is super cool, super neat. But this is where we go and we get our ornaments from, and that's another family tradition that we have here at the Lathan family residence. So who do I think this place is perfect for? I think this place is perfect for, you know, growing families and people that want to be kind of in the suburb and want to deal with that suburb life, but not be too tucked away. Many of our suburbs kind of start at that 35 to 45 mile away zone from downtown Houston. This one coming in right around the low 20 miles is definitely going to be the closest one for you. So if you want that, like I said, if you want that retreat life of being away from the city but not being too far away, this is going to be a good place for proximity, depending on kind of where you live and the section that you live. I would say some parts are a little bit better than others. You're going to have everything that you need as far as the infrastructure, restaurants, food, things, and shopping around you. You're going to have everything that you need. But this is going to be specifically for a person that wants to be in a suburb that's not too far away from downtown Houston. But if you have to be on the opposite side of the loop, so let's say you need to be in some of these suburbs like a Sugar Land, or if you need to be in a Richmond or any of these places, then if you have to make that kind of a commute, I don't know if this is going to be the best location for you, because the main interstate kind of in and out of the Spring area is 45, and 45, especially north of the loop, is one of the worst interstates that you could ever be on. I know that you can do the Hardy toll road to kind of avoid some of that on 45, but now you're paying to basically also be in traffic. So I think if getting to the loop and getting to Houston is kind of the max of where you need to go, I think this would be a great location. But if you need to go to the opposite side of the loop, I think this is probably going to be one of the worst locations that you can pick. And so another perk of being in this part of town is that you are very close to the airport. You're like 20 minutes away right now, depending on the route that you take, not too far. You can get down on the Hardy toll road or take some back roads to kind of get to the airport. But especially if you're going to be using Bush, the international airport up north, this is definitely one of the closest places that you can get to the airport. Now, if you need to go to Hobby, I think that's a whole nother can of worms. If that's your airport of choice, then this isn't going to be the place that you want to be. You're going to be closer to an hour away. But if you are traveling and you're using Bush, then I think this is going to be probably one of the best locations that you can pick. So one of the reasons why I really love the Spring area is because you get such a huge variety of homes. You can have some that are these super huge, big estate style, what I would call mini McMansions out in the greater Houston area. And you also have some that would be at what I would consider an entry level price point for like a starter home. So you don't really have to break the bank to really get into the greater Klein Spring area, which I think I always appreciate, especially for clients that are looking to get like their first home. And it's not going to be a super old and busted home. And so because it's so affordable, a lot of people just kind of gravitate to the area. And that's one of the reasons why I really love the Spring Klein kind of Champion Forest area. But hopping in, this is kind of what you can expect in some of the older sections. Is going to be these kind of ranch style kind of homes. Some of them have been renovated to make them a little bit more up to date. And then you hit a couple turns and you can be around a mini McMansion that has all these mature trees and has the elevations and has the what you would consider like stereotypical like suburb looking vibe with the nice pool in the back, the formal dining, formal office separation, right? This is what I would consider a house that looks like it would be in Katy, or looks like it would be in some parts of Humboldt, Atascocita, some parts of Kingwood, right? And so you can definitely get that variety of lifestyle out there as well. But yeah, just kind of hitting some turns in some parts of Spring is like I said, there's variety. You're gonna have some that are a little bit bigger, some that are a little bit mini McMansions out here. And this is kind of one of a more established, a little bit older, a little bit ritzier neighborhood. So you're gonna get some price points out here in the 5 to 6s to 700,000s out here. It's tied to the Klein ISD side on this side, but yeah, it's a really gorgeous community that gives you a huge amount of variety, and it's one of the reasons why I really love it, because your money just really seems to stretch out here a little bit further in the greater Klein Spring area than it does in many of the other parts of the greater Houston metro. And so because the greater Houston metro is what it is and our suburbs kind of expand the way that they do, you're going to find yourself being in places where in this part of Spring you're going to be tied to this school. Up north you're going to be tied to a completely different school district, and in what Google calls Spring you're going to be in a completely different school district. And depending on kind of where you are, you're going to pay higher taxes based on that school and the amenities kind of close to you. But now let's hop into niche.com and just see what the different school districts have to offer around the greater Spring Klein area. So on the north side of Spring, you're going to be tied to Conroe ISD for academics, teachers, everything. This is basically an A-rated school, right? So depending on kind of what school specific, you can't just always go by this, but the overall school district of Conroe ISD is very highly rated, very diverse, and it's just a great school system. So if you're in the northern edge of those parts of Spring and you can be tied to those, chances are your kiddo is going to have a fairly solid education. Hopping on into Spring ISD, not as great. So as you can see, that's going to be a very specific, there are some highly rated schools within the Spring ISD, but overall as a unit, Spring ISD is not as highly rated as Conroe ISD or as Klein ISD. So diversity is great. That's always something that you love to see. But as far as the ratings for academics and teachers and maybe testing, for taking it to that next level all the way up to college prep, maybe not as good as some of the surrounding school districts that you could be tied to if you're living in Spring. And last but not least, Klein ISD is one of the top rated school districts in the greater like Harris County area. So if you can be tied to those schools on the left side, great for diversity, solid for academics, great for schools, clubs, and college prep. This is a place that you're definitely going to want to, if you're focused on schools, most people that are focused on schools for their kids and kind of going up through the public school system, they tend to lean more to the Klein side in my experiences with my clients. And I would tend to agree just based on the ratings and the things that I've seen for the greater Klein ISD, where you don't have to be so far up north to where you're almost kind of going into that Magnolia County kind of Conroe side of Spring. You're still kind of tucked into the overall closeness of being in the mix of being very close to the greater Houston metro. So you're over here in this area to be on the Klein side of the school district, where you're still not that far away from the actual beltway and getting into the city of Houston. but you're getting a much better school experience by the ratings. Not my words, that's Niche's words. You're getting a much better school rating over here on the left hand side of 45. The next thing in the room, and probably the biggest question I get asked by anybody making the move or thinking about transitioning to the greater Houston metro is I'm looking at spring. Did it flood? Did Harvey do something terrible to it? And the answer is anywhere that Harvey basically touched here in the greater Houston metro was impacted on some level. There were some neighborhoods in spring that didn't do so well, and there were some areas in spring that got water up into their yard but didn't have any house damage, right? So it's really a case-by-case basis. One of the beautiful things that came out of Harvey, if you can say that, is that we got so many more resources and tools to help us do research on the front end to make sure that you're not buying a home that was a lemon that completely flooded out and was completely gutted. But like any of our suburb communities kind of out in the greater Houston metro, any of those suburb communities basically have some kind of level of water or some kind of higher risk because there's just so many creeks and reservoirs and little lakes that are just kind of sprinkled throughout our entire suburbs. And so anytime you're kind of looking out past the Houston area, you're going to be at a little bit higher risk than you would be if you lived in the city. And so to show you what I mean, let's just hop into HAR and just kind of explore some of the tools that we have on our side to make sure that you're not buying a lemon. And so let's hop on over into HAR just to show you the tools that we have right now. And you can see that for this one, you are in, for this house, it's a tricky one, right? Because you are specifically in an X zone, which you may or may not be required depending on the insurance provider that you talk to actually get a home based on the current mapping that they have for the community. You may not be required to actually have flood insurance, but all surrounding you are very high flood ranges. So the floodplains over here are definitely going to be high. They're definitely going to be surrounding these waterways that are very close to you. And so that's kind of the vibe that you get in many of our suburbs. And so, you know, if you go and you do some research on these specific communities, we're going to be looking at them just to see if that specific house flooded. And it's not a guarantee. I've been and had some listings that have been in some flood zones that were higher elevated than the city of Houston, and those houses didn't flood. It's not a for sure 100% thing that if you're close to a floodplain and something like that happens, you're gonna flood. It just is a higher risk that you could potentially flood because you're in between so many of these high water sources. But as you kind of see, cutting through Spring and cutting through Klein basically in half, there's a higher elevated risk basically through the entire area. And so as you'll see, as we do kind of more and more research on the area, it's going to be very important that we go like a house by house, neighborhood by neighborhood specific search when we're looking for you, because you can't generalize and say, yes, it flooded over here. No, it didn't flood over here. Just based on the maps, you're going to have to do a deep dive. And this is the first step that we would take. The next step that we would take is looking at the seller disclosure. So in Texas, the listing side, the listing agent and the owner of the home should be filling out a seller's disclosure to discuss everything that has ever happened to that home that they are aware of. It's kind of an honor system out here in Texas, but they fill out this form basically saying these are the issues that we've had. And the thing that we care most about when it comes to buying a house right now is looking at the actual flood risk. And so does this property have flood insurance? So that's a good thing. I, however, would encourage any of my clients that are going to be buying a home anywhere to get flood insurance regardless of where you actually live. Get flood insurance. If you don't require it, it's going to be much more affordable. But the last thing that you'll want is for a surprise huge, mega rain to pop up on you and just basically ruin your home. So get flood insurance no matter what. I tell my clients 100% of the time, get flood insurance. But hopping back over into the seller disclosure, it looks like a portion of this property is in a floodplain, kind of as we saw on the maps before, but they are saying that they have never flooded. And the secondary part that we want to check is, have they ever filed a flood claim for flood insurance? So usually if someone says they're not in a floodplain and they've filed some kind of a claim, we can kind of use our intelligence to kind of say, did this place flood? Was it like a fluke thing, like a pipe burst or something like that? we can decipher whether or not we think this is going to be a limit. But between the floodplain map and between the seller's disclosure, this is basically going to paint a picture of everything that we need to know as far as whether or not a home is going to be in a great location that is prone to flooding, or if it's going to be a little bit safer. But like I said before, anywhere that can rain, it can flood. So I encourage all of my clients every time, 100% of the time, to get flood insurance regardless of where you're living. The last thing that we're going to touch on today are the taxes. The tax rules tend to be the same as they are in many of the metros. As you kind of go to these newer construction places where the infrastructure needs to be built out, you're going to have a higher tax. Whereas when you go to some of these more established locations, you're going to see a lower tax range in the mid twos, give or take. But as you get tied to better schools, you're going to see those taxes bump up as well. And let's just hop on over into the map to kind of see a few examples of what I mean. So this is an older community. This was built out in the late 70s, early 80s. And so this is in Lexington Woods. I would consider this a nice part of the spring. Nice entry-level part of spring. And so this is an older community, and as you can see, just kind of hovering down, going down here, this is right in line with what I pay in the greater Houston area right now, in a Harris County market that is kind of gentrifying, doesn't have that many resources tied to us immediately. This is more in line with what you're going to see in many parts of the older parts of spring that aren't maybe necessarily tied to the greatest schools. And so kind of looking at what we looked at earlier, this is going to be tied to Spring ISD. And so as we see, the houses get a little bit older, the communities are a little bit more established, you're going to be tied to schools that maybe don't have the infrastructure that you need to see those super high taxes. And so your tax rate is going to be a little bit lower because those communities are built out. You're not going to be paying mud taxes in a lot of those locations that are at a super high rate, and you're not going to be paying for high school rates either in the tax zone. So your tax bill is going to be a little bit lower in a community like this. As we go into the new construction side, however, that things change because you're paying a heavier penny. Even though you are still in the spring, you're probably going to be tied to some of the better schools of spring, and you're also going to be paying a mud tax for a lot of the infrastructure to be brought out there. So your sewer, your water, trash. And so I would expect this one to be in the 3%. So we scroll on down, and this is a 3.1. Now that is fairly low compared to some of the other suburb communities. I know there's some sections in some of my favorite communities in Cypress that are still at like 3.6, 3.7 for a tax rate, and those sections are like 10 or 15 years old. And so this is low when you compare it to some of the other communities that are surrounding us and still developing out. But this is still going to be higher than what you can expect for your average ranch style or kind of older bungalow style kind of house in the spring area that was built in like the 60s through 2000. And then the third side of the spectrum is kind of going over to the Klein side, which is going to be a higher rated school district, and it's going to be tied to some better schools, and it's going to have a little bit more infrastructure on the Klein side of spring. And so what I would expect, even though the community is established, and even though you're going to be not necessarily paying the highest premium for the mud taxes because the infrastructure is there and it's up and it's running now, and most of those bonds have been paid off, you're still going to be paying a higher premium because the school district is better. And so I would expect to see somewhere in the 2.6 to 2.8-ish kind of range. And as we scroll down, we are 2.67, right? So that's kind of the range of what you're going to see. You're going to see some older communities that are tied to some of the schools that maybe aren't the greatest, that you're going to pay a lower tax rate. You're going to go into some communities that are a little bit more established but are tied to great schools, and so you're going to see your tax rate being that upper 2 to maybe low 3s. And then as you get into new construction where they still need to build out the communities and still have the infrastructure, your water, sewer, trash, all those things that are needed in a community, you're still going to be paying in the 3.3% tax rate and above, just because you're paying for all of the infrastructure to basically be brought out to that community. So how did I do? Hopefully I did not scare you away from the Spring Klein area. I think it is a great location depending on your specific goals and your specific needs. It could be great for all of the entertainment that you're going to need, all the restaurant shopping, as well as growing your family in the greater Spring Klein area. What do you think? If you're not quite sold on the Spring Klein area and you want to check out some other communities, I'll drop those videos over there where I did some vlogs on some nearby communities. YouTube thinks you should check this video out next, so after this one, go ahead and do that. I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope you have an amazing day.